Welcome back to Educator.com's English Grammar course. This lesson is on objects. Let's get started. All right, we're going to begin with a brief overview. We're going to talk about transitive and intransitive verbs, which ones take an object and which ones don't. We're going to ask what is an object. We're going to look at direct and indirect objects. And finally, we're going to look at how to use objects in grammatical sentences. All right, the difference between a transitive and an intransitive verb. A transitive verb takes a direct object. There is something in the sentence that directly receives the action. The way you remember this is a transitive verb, transit of course means transportation, travel. A transitive verb takes you to an object, transit. So, this morning Sally baked is our verb, a cake. Cake receives the verb baked. What did she bake? She baked a cake. The cake is what received the baking. An intransitive verb does not take a direct object. Sally sings beautifully. Well, beautifully is not the recipient of sings. You don't say that, what does she sing? She sings beautifully. Beautifully is not a what. So, sings is an intransitive verb in this case, and beautifully is not an object. Well, what is an object? The object of a verb receives the action of that verb. The object of a verb will never be found in a prepositional phrase. Never, never, never. There is such a thing as an object of a preposition, but the object of a preposition is never the object of a verb. So, let's look at some examples. I love painting. Our subject is I, our verb is love, and painting is what receives the action of the verb love. We understand your message. Our subject is we, our verb is understand, and what is it that we understand? What receives our understanding? Your message. I have brought you flowers. I is the subject, have brought is the verb, and in this case we have both a direct and an indirect object. It's the flowers that are the direct object. They receive the brought. And you is what's called an indirect object, which is receiving the flowers. We're going to get into this in more detail as the lesson goes on. But to begin with, let's look at direct objects. The direct object directly receives the action of the verb. We understand your message. Our verb is understand, and your message receives that action. I love painting. I have 3 gallons of milk in the refrigerator. George married Martha last year. Now the indirect object receives the direct object. So, let's look at the sentence, Fred showed me your message. Fred is our subject, showed is the verb, and message, your message, is the direct object. It's what's actually being shown. But me is the indirect object. If your message receives the action showed, me receives your message. I have brought you flowers. I is our subject, have brought is our verb, flowers is our direct object, and you is our indirect object. Now remember, you can only have an indirect object if you already have a direct object in the sentence. Without a direct object, there's nothing for the indirect object to receive, and it's not an indirect object. George gave Martha a wedding ring. Well, a wedding ring is the direct object, that's what actually received the giving, and Martha, the indirect object, received the ring. I find it helps to think of direct and indirect objects as being sort of like a baseball. If you have the sentence, Bob threw George the ball is the direct object. It's what's actually receiving the throwing. The ball is experiencing the G-force of being hurled at George. Ah! George is the indirect object. He just catches the ball. So, the ball takes the direct brunt of the verb. George gets it indirectly, so he's the indirect object. All right. Object of a verb versus object of a preposition. Neither a direct object nor an indirect object can ever be part of a prepositional phrase. Let's look at how this breaks down. Paulo threw Mark the ball. Paulo is our subject. Threw is our verb. The ball is our direct object. Remember, that was our example. The ball is what's getting thrown. And Mark is the indirect object because it's receiving the ball. Not the throwing, but the ball. But there are a couple of different ways you can say this. Paulo, there's our subject again, threw the ball to Mark. Well, the ball is still the direct object. It's still experiencing the g-forces, but to Mark is a prepositional phrase. And prepositional phrases are modifiers, and they do not count for the purpose of direct and indirect objects. They're kind of their own little world within the sentence. All right, you can also look at Paulo reached for the ball. For the ball is another prepositional phrase, so there is neither a direct object nor an indirect object in this sentence. You have a subject, Paulo, and you have a verb, reached, and you don't have anything else. All right, see if you can find the subject, the predicate, and the direct and indirect object, if any, in each of these sentences. Between you and me, Sanford should offer Anne that position. Please give Elliot my best. Geese fly south in the winter. I fly a private jet for a government official. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. And here we are. Between you and me, Sanford should offer Anne that position. Well, Sanford is our subject. Should offer is our verb phrase. And Anne is the indirect object that is receiving that position, the direct object. The position is actually what's being offered, and Anne is receiving the position. So we have an indirect object followed by a direct object. Remember, indirect objects usually come before direct objects if they're going to be there at all. All right, please give Elliot my best. Now, this is an imperative sentence. It's a command. So the subject is actually the implied you. What do? You give, that's our verb, Elliot my best. Well, my best is the direct object because it's receiving the actual giving, and Elliot is the indirect object because he is receiving the best. Geese fly south in the winter. This one actually has neither a direct object nor a direct object. Geese is our subject. Fly is our verb. South is actually an adverb modifying fly, and in the winter is a prepositional phrase. So we know that you can't find a direct or indirect object in a prepositional phrase, so there is no kind of object in this sentence. I fly a private jet for a government official. I is our subject. Fly is our verb. A private jet is the direct object. For a government official is a prepositional phrase. Now this is interesting. Fly can be either a transitive or an intransitive verb. In the case of geese fly south in the winter, there's no direct object. But in the case of I fly a private jet, well, now you have something that's receiving the action fly, the jet. So depending on how verbs are used, they may or may not be transitive. You have to watch out for that when you're looking for objects. See if you can find the subject, predicate, and direct and indirect object, if any, in each of these sentences. I love chocolate chip cookies. You are my true love. I offer you my unconditional love. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. And here we are. First sentence, I is the subject. I is what's performing the action, so our predicate is love chocolate chip cookies. What do? I love chocolate chip cookies. Love is our verb, and chocolate chip cookies is one big direct object. It's receiving the action love, as chocolate chip cookies should. You are my true love. Well, you is the subject here. That's what's performing the action. Are is our verb, but remember, when are, or any form of the verb to be, is the main verb in a sentence, it's acting as a linking verb. This is a verb you can replace with an equal sign. Linking verbs do not have direct objects. They have what is called a complement. So this whole thing is a subject complement. It's renaming the subject you. And are my true love is the predicate of the whole sentence. I offer you my unconditional love. I is the subject. Offer is the verb. Offer you my unconditional love is the whole predicate. Now what's actually receiving the offer, remember it's actually taking the g-forces of the ball being thrown, is my unconditional love. So it's receiving offer, and you are receiving love, which makes you the indirect object. All right, one last round of practice. See if you can find the subjects, predicates, and objects, if any. Pass me that pen on the table. Has John given you the book yet? Why did you give Michaela the credit for my work? Remember to cross out any prepositional phrases that you find. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. And here we are. Pass me that pen on the table. Well, this is an imperative sentence. It's a command. So the subject, as always with an imperative, is an implied you. Pass is our verb. That pen is what's actually taking the g-forces of being passed, so it's the direct object. Me is the indirect object that's receiving the pen, and on the table is a prepositional phrase, so we're ignoring it for this purpose. Has John given you the book yet? All right, John is our subject. You remember that the order of subjects and predicates can be a little bit mixed up in the cases of questions. And has given you the book yet is our predicate. Has given is our verb phrase. The book is our direct object. Again, it's receiving the giving. And you is the indirect object because you is what's receiving the book. Why did you give Michaela the credit for my work? All right. The subject here is you. The verb phrase is did give. Once again, we have a predicate that's broken up because this is a question. And the credit is the direct object. Again, it's what's being given. So it's receiving the action of the verb give, and Michaela is receiving the direct object credit. And for my work is a prepositional phrase, and we're ignoring it while we're looking for objects. That's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching Educator.com.